The air was electric with the kind of smug, self-congratulatory energy that only a lot of new money and a corporate-sponsored fishing tournament can generate. Hundreds of wealthy residents and their guests were gathered on the pristine, manicured lawn of the Heron Bay Estates common area. Dozens of gleaming, glitter-coated bass boats, worth more than my entire house, bobbed impatiently on the water. On a professionally constructed podium, flanked by banners from boat manufacturers and high-end fishing gear companies, stood Cynthia, the president of our HOA, the queen of the lake, in her element. She tapped the microphone, a sound that echoed across the water. "Welcome, welcome everyone, to the 3rd annual Heron Bay Fishing Classic," she chirped, her voice dripping with practiced enthusiasm. "We have a record number of entrants, our biggest prize ever, and a truly gorgeous day for fishing." Polite ripple of applause went through the crowd. She beamed, soaking it in. She then turned to the man standing next to her, stern-looking officer in the crisp green uniform of the State Fish and Wildlife Department. "And now, to officially declare the tournament open, our distinguished guest, State Game Warden Stevens." The warden, a man with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, stepped up to the microphone. He didn't smile. He looked out over the crowd, his gaze lingering for a moment on me, standing quietly at the back by the old oak tree. "Good morning," the warden said, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that instantly silenced the chatter. "As the ranking state conservation officer for this region, I am here to make an official announcement. Pursuant to state regulations and an investigation into permit irregularities, the permit for the 2025 Heron Bay Fishing Classic has been found to be invalid and is hereby revoked. This tournament is canceled, effective immediately." A collective stunned gasp went through the crowd. Cynthia's perfect, practiced smile froze, then shattered. Her face went from beaming to bewildered in a split second. "Any individual casting a line in a competitive manner today will be in violation of state law," the warden continued, his voice like iron. "Your vessel and all equipment will be subject to immediate confiscation, and you will face a fine of up to $5,000. That is all." He stepped back from the microphone. The silence that followed was absolute, a deep, profound, and beautiful silence. Cynthia stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a stranded fish. Then, her eyes, filled with a dawning, horrified comprehension, scanned the crowd and locked onto me. That's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment of beautiful, glorious chaos, you have to understand my family's relationship with this lake. My name is Daniel Miller. My family has been on the shores of Heron Lake for 70 years. Grandfather built a small, rustic bait and tackle shop here back in the 1950s. A simple, honest place he called Miller's Landing. He sold live bait, hand-tied flies, and gave out free advice on where the bass were biting. My father took it over from him, and now I run it. Miller's Landing is more than just a business to me. It's a legacy. It's a connection to the lake and to a way of life that is slowly disappearing. It's a place with character, a place that smells of lake water, night crawlers, and old wood. It has a simple gravel parking lot and a sturdy, no-frills boat launch that is, and always has been, open to the public. For decades, it was the heart of the local fishing community, but the community changed. The old, modest fishing cabins that used to dot the shoreline were torn down, one by one, and replaced by massive, ostentatious mansions. The development was called Heron Bay Estates, and with it came an army of new residents and a powerful, overbearing HOA, and the commander of that army was Cynthia. Cynthia was a former marketing executive from the city, a woman who saw the world not as a place to live, but as a brand to be managed. She was elected HOA president on a platform of exclusivity and elevation. She wanted to transform our quiet middle-class lake into a playground for the wealthy, a kind of freshwater Hamptons. And my humble, authentic, slightly messy bait and tackle shop was in her eyes, a stain on her perfect brand. Our first real interaction was a perfect foreshadowing of the war to come. She came into my shop, not to buy anything, but to critique. She wrinkled her nose at the smell of the live bait and ran a finger over a dusty shelf of antique lures. "You know," she'd said, her voice dripping with condescending advice, "this is a prime piece of real estate. You could really elevate this. A chic little cafe, perhaps? A boutique with high-end lake apparel? I'm just saying, the current aesthetic is really dragging down the property values of the entire bay." "I like the aesthetic," I replied, my voice tighter than I'd intended. "My grandfather built it. My customers seem to like it too." She gave me a pitying look, as if I were a clueless child who didn't understand what was good for him. "Well," she sighed, "the board will be discussing the future of this corner of the lake. We'll be in touch." The future of my corner of the lake. The arrogance was breathtaking. The centerpiece of Cynthia's grand vision was the annual Heron Bay Fishing Classic. In her mind, this wasn't just a friendly fishing tournament. It was a high society sporting event, chance to attract corporate sponsors, to get mentioned in glossy lifestyle magazines. To cement Heron Bay's reputation as a luxury destination, the first shot in her war against me was a formal letter delivered by a courier. It was from the HOA, and it didn't request, it informed. It informed me that, during the week of the fishing classic, my private boat launch and parking lot would be commandeered for official tournament use for competitor overflow parking and a VIP sponsor experience tent. It went on to state that my regular customers' access would be severely restricted during this period to ensure a smooth, professional, and high-end experience for all registered participants and sponsors. I read the letter twice, my blood beginning to boil. She was trying to take over my business, my private property, for her fancy party. She hadn't even bothered to ask. I wrote a polite but firm letter back, explaining that Miller's Landing was a private operational business and that we would be open to our regular, loyal customers during the tournament, as we were every other day of the year. I enclosed a copy of my business license and my property deed for her reference. Cynthia's response was swift and vicious. The very next day, a series of one-star online reviews for my shop appeared. They were all from new, anonymous accounts, and they were all full of vicious, specific lies. Owner was rude and unhelpful. It's unsanitary conditions. The whole place smells of dead fish. Way overpriced. This guy is a total price gouger. Avoid at all costs. It was a coordinated digital carpet bombing designed to destroy my reputation and my livelihood. She couldn't take over my business, so she had decided to try and kill it instead. My phone started ringing with calls from longtime customers asking what was going on. My modest income, the lifeblood of my family's legacy, began to take a serious, noticeable hit. Then came the next wave of attack. The HOA board, under her direction, passed a new emergency special event commercial zone bylaw. A masterpiece of legal sophistry, but its intent was clear. It stated that during any officially sanctioned and permitted HOA event, all commercial properties geographically adjacent to the community were subject to a list of draconian restrictions, including limits on operating hours, traffic flow, and noise levels. It was a targeted legal weapon designed to give her the power to effectively shut me down during her precious tournament week. My anger was now a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach. This was no longer just a disagreement. This was a malicious, calculated campaign to destroy my family's 70-year-old business. And that's when I decided to stop playing defense. It was time to look into the tournament itself. And that's where my family's real history with this lake came into play. Back in the 1960s, the lake was facing a crisis of overfishing and pollution. My grandfather, a passionate conservationist, worked for years with the State Fish and Wildlife Department to create a comprehensive conservation and management plan for the entire lake. As part of that historic agreement to ensure that the lake would always have a dedicated, non-political protector, the state created a unique legal designation. The Miller family, as the original stewards of the lake's primary public access point, were named the official designated lake stewards. And the agreement, which was codified into state administrative law, stipulated that any competitive C-class or higher fishing tournament on the lake required a special event permit, and that permit was legally invalid without the counter-signature of the designated lake steward. Signature from me. For years this had been a formality. The previous, more reasonable HOA president would come to my shop a month before the tournament. We'd have a cup of coffee. He'd show me his plans to ensure a safe and environmentally responsible event, and I'd happily sign the form. But Cynthia, in her arrogance, had never come to me. She had never asked. I had a sudden, sick feeling in my stomach. I went to the state's Fish and Wildlife Public Permit Portal website. I searched for the permit for the Heron Bay fishing. Classic. There it was. Approved. I downloaded the PDF of the application. I scrolled down to the final page, to the signature block, and I felt a jolt, as if I'd been struck by lightning, in the box labeled Designated Lake Steward. Signature. There was a signature. Clumsy, childish, and utterly fraudulent forgery of my own name. She hadn't just ignored me. She hadn't just forgotten. She had knowingly and willfully committed a felony. She had forged my name on a state document. In that moment I had her. I could have taken the evidence to the sheriff. I could have gone to her and used it as leverage to get her to back off, but that wasn't enough. She hadn't just tried to inconvenience me. She had tried to destroy my reputation, my business, my family's legacy. She had disrespected the very lake my family had spent a lifetime protecting. She deserved more than just to be stopped. She deserved to be publicly and spectacularly dismantled. So I made a plan. Quiet, patient, and absolutely devastating plan. I didn't say a word to anyone. I let her continue with her preparations. I watched as the big sponsor banners went up. I watched as the media alerts were sent out. I watched as she built her magnificent castle of vanity on a foundation of pure fraud. And then, 2 days before the tournament, I made a single phone call. It's an old friend of my father's, a man who is now the regional head of the Fish and Wildlife Enforcement Division. I told him the whole story. I emailed him the copies of the real permit from last year and the fraudulent one from this year. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Danny," he finally said, his voice grim. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Don't you worry, we will handle this. You just be at the tournament on Saturday morning and maybe stand near the back." And that brings us back to that perfect, beautiful morning, the sun shining, the boats gleaming, and Game Warden Stevens at the podium, dropping a bomb that shattered the perfect, placid surface of Cynthia's world. As the warden finished his announcement, as the full, catastrophic weight of the words tournament is cancelled, settled, over the crowd, all hell broke loose. A wave of angry, confused shouting erupted from the fishermen. The corporate sponsors looked horrified. And Cynthia, her face a mask of blotchy, furious disbelief, was screaming at the warden. "This is a lie. It's a trick. My permit is valid. I have the paperwork right here. It's all approved." The warden just looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, the signature on your permit application has been found to be a forgery. Therefore, the permit is, and always has been, null and void." And then Cynthia saw me, standing at the back of the crowd by the old oak tree. Watching, the dawning comprehension in her eyes was a sight to behold. It was quickly replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You!" she shrieked, her voice echoing across the now silent lake. "You did this! You've sabotaged everything. I will ruin you. I will sue you into the Stone Age. You will never recover from this." She actually started storming towards me, a woman completely unhinged. But before she could get halfway, the game warden's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Ma'am, I would advise you to stop right there." I didn't say a word. I just walked forward and handed a thick file to the warden. It was my own personal file. Inside was a copy of the real permit application from the previous year, with my clear, authentic signature. Beside it was the fraudulent one for this year. The forgery was laughably bad. The file also contained printouts of all the threatening letters from the HOA, the screenshots of the fake, malicious online reviews, and a signed, notarized statement from 3 of my suppliers. Confirming the harassment, the warden leafed through the documents, his face growing darker with every page. He now understood the full scope of the situation. This wasn't just a simple forgery. This was the culmination of a long, malicious campaign of harassment and attempted corporate sabotage. He looked up from the file and locked his cold, hard gaze on Cynthia. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now devoid of all patience. "Not only is this event canceled due to your own fraudulent actions, but you are now the subject of an active criminal investigation for felony forgery of a state document and for making fraudulent statements on an official permit application. These are serious charges." He then gestured to a county sheriff's deputy who had just arrived, drawn by the commotion. "And I believe the sheriff's department," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "will be very, very interested in this extensive evidence of a sustained harassment campaign against a local business owner." Cynthia's face completely and utterly collapsed. The color drained away, leaving a pale, quivering mask of pure terror. The wealthy sponsors were furiously packing up their banners and tents. The fishermen were loading their expensive boats back onto their trailers, a low, angry murmur rippling through them as they glared in her direction. Her entire carefully constructed world of prestige, of power, of carefully managed appearances, had been publicly and humiliatingly dismantled in the space of 10 minutes. The fallout was catastrophic. Cynthia was charged with felony forgery. The HOA was hit with a massive fine from the state for attempting to hold an unpermitted and illegal event. They were also facing a class action lawsuit from the corporate sponsors and the tournament entrants, all of whom wanted their money back. The HOA, under new, terrified leadership, is now a shell of its former self. They are nearly bankrupt from the legal fees and the fines. They don't bother me anymore. In fact, they seem to be terrified of me. My little bait and tackle shop, the place she tried to destroy, is doing better than ever, filled with grateful, loyal fishermen who now know the whole story. This whole mess taught me a lesson that my grandfather tried to teach me long ago. The flashy, loud, and powerful are often just a thin veneer on the surface of things. The real power, the real history, the real rules are often quiet, old, and buried in the details. Cynthia thought the fishing tournament was about her sponsors, her parties, her prestige. She was so obsessed with the spectacle that she completely forgot that at its heart it was about the lake. And she never, ever bothered to learn the real rules of the lake, or to show a little respect to the quiet old man whose family had been writing them for generations. Cynthia's trial is this fall, and I've been subpoenaed to testify as the state's star witness. But her husband was just appointed to the county's zoning and permitting board, and he's just proposed a full, comprehensive review of all antiquated and restrictive historical environmental stewardship designations and agreements. Currently on the books,